Hi, Brett Warren here, your trusted resource for the Brisbane property market. Well, you would have seen in the last few months our CBD is starting to expand with the beginning of the Queen's Wharf project, a massive expansion. Our airport's getting a second runway and our hospitals are also starting to expand. But who's going to fill these jobs? Our immigration has been cut by more than a half. In 2008, we had 113,000 people a year moving to Brisbane. In 2015, that plummeted to only about 55,000. Is that going to turn around? There's been some good signs early. Today I'm going to talk to Pete Wargent, who is financially free at the age of 33. And he has the freak ability to be able to translate these graphs and trends for ordinary people like us to predict what's going to happen in the future. I'm excited to talk to Pete, so let's go and hear what he has to say. Hey Pete, thanks very much for joining us. To start with, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and also your area of expertise?
Sure, well I'm a property analyst, so I do analysis for big financial institutions, also do a bit of property buying, so that's what I'm most well known for.
Sure, okay. Recent figures obviously we've seen from immigration and things like that in Brisbane over the last 7 to 10 years have really declined, probably half of what it was in 2008. But we're starting to see some of those numbers turn around. I know you've identified some of those numbers as well. Can we start with the interstate migration? Recently, I think in the last 2 years, it's doubled from our low. Are you starting to see those trends as well?
Yes, so as you said, if you think back to the mining boom, it was a once in 150 year event, and Queensland was one of the main beneficiaries of that huge boom in migration. As we came down the other side of the resources construction boom, there was a very sharp slowdown. But now we've been through the worst in Queensland since 2014, and as you said, internal migration in particular is starting to pick up again.
Yeah, and what drives that? What drives people moving to Queensland?
A big part of it is property prices. If you look back to 2003 when the Sydney market peaked, there was a big surge of migrants to southeast Queensland. We're seeing the same thing again now, particularly people from Sydney, with the ratio of prices of house prices at about 2.2 Sydney to Brisbane, which is as high as it's ever been. So we're starting to see people filtering up from New South Wales.
Great, and the other figure is overseas migration. In the last 12 months, Brisbane's actually led the nation with about 19% increase year upon year. Are you seeing those numbers trend up? What's causing it and what brings people from overseas?
Yeah, affordability, lifestyle is always a key driver in Queensland. The big challenge for Brisbane, we've seen quite a lot of hiring in the public sector, built a lot of apartments, which has created employment, but Queensland needs to start creating employment in other sectors. That's the big challenge, to sustain that level of migration.
Yeah, okay. I've also noticed that ABS are predicting within the next 10 or 12 years there'll be another 1 million people here in Brisbane. Are they usually on the money? Are they usually up or down? And how do you see that playing out?
It's very hard to forecast over the long range, and in fact the ABS forecasted around the turn of the century very much undershot by about 2.5 million nationally because of the mining boom. So very difficult to project what will happen over 12-15 years, but at the current rate of growth it seems reasonable to expect that Brisbane will see towards 1 million extra inhabitants over that kind of time period.
Sure, and your research is generally those capital cities where people are moving, where the jobs are and things like that as well?
Increasingly so, in fact, particularly migrants from overseas, people very much attracted to Sydney and Melbourne. And what we've seen from the census in particular is that migrants are not only migrating to the capital cities, but they're actually staying there as well. And then the natural growth of the population. So population growth has become intensely focused on Sydney, Melbourne and southeast Queensland over recent years.
Sure. And while population growth is good, we also need those people that are actually going to work and contribute to the society and build a better country. Are we seeing more of those people being brought in from overseas with visas and things like that?
Absolutely, yes. So Australia is quite fortunate. Its visa programs are largely tilted towards the under 30s. So we're seeing a big spike in people around about the 25 to 32 age bracket. We saw that in the census, a big surge. It's a big factor for housing demand, people forming households at those kind of ages. Another big driver recently has been international students. It's not well reported, but there's been a big uplift in student visas, particularly from China.
Sure, I've read a lot of that on your blog actually, so that's really interesting. Finally, how do you see the next 10 years in Brisbane playing out? Do you think it's going to be a little bit different from the last 10 years? And is there some light on the horizon, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look over 10-year time periods, property markets generally have done very well in Australia's capitals. I think Brisbane, probably more than any other capital, is quite a patchy market. So there's some oversupply of apartments in the inner city, but less well recognised perhaps in the media. There's been some areas that have performed very strongly, generally for detached housing and by and large in the inner to middle ring suburbs.
Yeah, great. Look, thanks very much for sharing those insights. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out in the next couple of years.
Pleasure, Brett.
Thanks for your time. So there you go, guys, some great insights from Pete Wargent. People are starting to return to Queensland again. Our interstate migration's picking up and leading the nation, and also our overseas migration with more people coming to Brisbane. If ABS are right and there's a million more people moving to Brisbane in the next 10 to 12 years, those jobs will be snapped up in a hurry. It's going to make a massive difference to our economy, and our property markets will start moving again. Thanks for watching.